5:12 p.m. Bristol. A scream pierced the air outside St Andrew's School. Seconds later, panic. A 14-year-old boy lay on the ground, a knife in his hand. The crowd froze. Police quickly moved in, stun gunning a 25-year-old Syrian refugee who had arrived here in 2021. Within minutes, the video was everywhere. Blood on the sidewalk, daytime chaos, mothers pulling their children inside. By dusk, the question had spread, how did compassion turn to fear? And who dares call this control? Stop, because what happened next shook the entire south coast. By nightfall, the numbers hit like a second attack. £9.6 million a day. That's what Britain spends to house 56,000 asylum seekers across 184 hotels, many built beside towns already fighting unemployment and hunger. 45% arrived without verified identity, yet all received rooms, meals and stipends. The Home Office called it stability. Britons called it surrender. In Parliament, order collapsed faster than calm. Labour ministers defended the policy as humanitarian management. Conservatives called it economic suicide. One backbencher shouted over the Speaker's gavel, "We're paying for the knife that cut our own child." Cameras caught the silence that followed. Outside Westminster, patience was cracking. Supermarket queues turned into arguments. Taxi radios replayed the same clip from Bristol again and again. Across social media, 3 words rose through the noise. Not under control. The statistics kept scrolling like accusations. Arrivals up 52%, removals down 80%, hotel use up 47% since the election. Yet the Prime Minister repeated the same line. Britain's border is secure. No one believed it. The mood shifted from compassion to calculation. And as midnight spread across the coast, one thought took hold. If the government couldn't defend the border, the streets would. It began in Bournemouth, a flare over the pier, a crowd that started as dozens and became 70,000 by midnight. Save our streets, their banners read, painted by hand and rage. Plymouth followed within an hour, 40,000 more blocking the coastal highway. By dawn, Exeter joined, camping outside 3 government-funded hotels. The south coast was awake, a single wall of red smoke and fury. Police formed lines, but they broke as fast as they formed. Bottles, sirens, fire. 22 officers injured, 3 vehicles burned, £3.7 million in damage before sunrise. What began as protest became siege. Helicopters circled over streets, lit only by phone screens and flames. From rooftops came the chants, "Protect our women! Save our kids!" Mothers marched beside veterans, teenagers beside the unemployed. No slogans of hate, only exhaustion, betrayal, and the sound of a nation saying enough. Reporters called it unrest. Locals called it revenge. A man in a tattered uniform shouted through the smoke, "We fought for this island once. We'll fight for it again." By 3 a.m, the coastlines of Britain were burning in sequence. Bournemouth, Plymouth, Exeter. And somewhere between the chants and the flames, the word riot lost its meaning. This was something older. Something the government could no longer contain. Before we continue, if you think this ends with burning streets, you're wrong. What comes next doesn't happen outside, but inside the walls of power. Stay with us because the real collapse begins in Downing Street, and you'll want to see who breaks first. At 7:15 a.m, the lights inside Downing Street flickered awake. Ministers arrived through the side gate, faces grey, voices low. The Prime Minister had called an emergency COBRA meeting. On the table lay a single headline. Who lost the South Coast? Intelligence briefings warned that protests were now forming in 18 towns, stretching police reserves past exhaustion. 12,400 overtime hours logged overnight. No rest, no replacements. The Home Secretary demanded total control. Curfews, internet blocks, curtail orders. The Defence Minister refused. "We're not fighting a foreign enemy," he said. "We're fighting disbelief." The words hung in the air like a verdict. By midday, the pound fell 1.8% and the stock exchange dipped 3.2%. Leaked files titled Operation Silent Tide surfaced online. plans for media blackouts, digital restrictions, and the deployment of 2,000 troops to assist civil order. The footage of armoured vehicles leaving London spread within minutes, tagged #Civil War in blue. Inside the Commons, 2 cabinet ministers walked out. One resigned live on air. You can't police hunger and betrayal. The other warned that using troops against citizens would shatter the covenant forever. And outside, the chants grew louder than the orders. Britain wasn't breaking from the outside anymore, it was breaking from within. By evening, the government reached for its last weapon. Silence. Major broadcasters replaced live coverage with nature films and cooking shows. Social media throttled hashtags linked to the coast. Posts tagged #Bournemouth vanished within seconds. The official line called it digital containment. But the truth was already multiplying. Mirror uploads, proxy servers, foreign news outlets streaming the footage the BBC refused to air. Within 24 hours, over 53 million views. A grandmother coughing through tear gas. A police officer kneeling beside a fallen protester. A boy holding the Union Jack upside down. Each image undercut the government's version of control. Inside BBC headquarters, 2 presenters walked off set. ITV producers leaked scripts marked public reassurance package. The next morning, the Sentinel printed one headline in black ink across its front page: a nation gagged. Priests spoke about false kings and blind shepherds. Teachers turned history lessons into debates about freedom. Even soldiers began asking who they were really defending. For the first time in years, Britain felt something more dangerous than violence. Awareness. The blackout didn't calm the nation, it illuminated it. And as truth spread through the silence, people realised that censorship hadn't protected them. It had only proven they were right to be afraid. 48 hours later, the silence broke. Not with slogans, with footsteps. From across the country, veterans gathered in London, 85,000 men and women. No banners, no chants, just medals on worn coats and faces carved by memory. They called it the March of the Forgotten. When police received the order to disperse them, nearly half refused. Some simply stood aside, others raised their hands in salute. One officer whispered to a reporter, "We protect the people, not the payroll." The image, a police salute under grey morning light, travelled faster than any speech. Crowds lined the pavements, silent but defiant. Old soldiers led mothers carrying photographs of their children. Students held candles. Veterans carried folded flags. The anthem rose, not as pride, but warning. Send her victorious! By midday, over 60 towns mirrored the march. Hashtags flooded every platform. March of the Forgotten hit 80 million views before the networks could pull it down. Inside Downing Street, aides whispered the truth no one wanted to say. Like, the government hadn't just lost control, it had lost consent. Power was still in office, but authority was on the street. And across Britain, a single realisation spread. The nation wasn't rebelling against its leaders, it was remembering who it was. At dawn, the Prime Minister finally appeared, a white backdrop. No flag, no applause, only a hollow voice reading from a script no one believed. Order has been restored. But outside, order was rewriting itself. In Portsmouth, veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed beneath a rising sun. In Manchester, 10,000 teachers and parents held a candlelight vigil for the injured and the ignored. And in Nottingham, church bells rang, not in celebration, but in warning. The anthem echoed once more through the streets, but its tone had changed. Every word, "Send her victorious, happy and glorious," now carried the weight of defiance. Inside Parliament, panic replaced policy. The one MP shouted across the chamber, "You've lost the people and their respect." No one answered. Another whispered, "Respect doesn't return once it's gone." Ministers looked at each other, not as colleagues, but as survivors. Outside Number 10, hundreds gathered in silence. Then came the sound. Slow, deliberate clapping. Veterans, mothers, teenagers. Every clap louder than the last. Echoing off the walls that once symbolised power. It wasn't celebration, it was countdown. By morning, the protests were over, but something deeper had taken root. Streets swept clean, air thick with realisation. The government still stood, technically, but authority had already left the building. Across the country, people spoke quietly, almost with disbelief. Britain wasn't broken, but it was ignored. And as dawn spread across the south coast, the lion that had been silenced for years no longer slept. It was awake, watching, waiting, remembering what it means to roar. If you still believe truth matters, stay, because the next roar isn't coming from the streets. It's coming from the people who refuse to be silent.